This session is sponsored by AEP Texas, Frisco Economic Development Corporation, and the Brazos Valley Economic Development Corporation.
Celebrating diversity and inclusion in the 21st century. Dr. Frank Ashley III, Senior Associate Dean and Senior Professor of the Bush School of Government, Texas A&M University. Dr. Ashley received his degrees from Louisiana College and the University of Alabama. Before assuming his current position at the Bush School, he served as a Senior Vice President for the College Board in New York, where he worked on initiatives to increase college participation for underprivileged students. In his 40-plus years in education, Dr. Ashley has served in a variety of roles, including teacher, coach, and administrator. During his tenure at Texas A&M University, Ashley spoke to many K-12 students in the local and surrounding school districts about the importance of education. One of his proudest achievements at A&M was bringing the National Youth Sports Program, a sports and education program for economically and underprivileged kids, to the Brazos Valley. Dr. Ashley has served as a faculty member and administrator at Texas A&M University Commerce. As the Dean of the College of Education, he was once again very active in the surrounding school districts, speaking to administrators, teachers, and students about the importance of education. Along with his work at the university, he served on the Commerce ISD School Board, and in 2006, he received the Citizen of the Year Award. The following year, Dr. Ashley received the Distinguished Service Award from the Faculty Senate of Texas A&M Commerce. And upon his departure, Frank Ashley Integrity in Education Award was established in his honor. Dr. Ashley returned to College Station as the Vice Chancellor for the Texas A&M University system. Dr. Ashley has numerous publications and presentations and has been presented nationally and internationally. Join me today as we learn more about celebrating diversity and inclusiveness in the 21st century. Here's Dr. Ashley.
First of all, I must say it's truly an honor to be a speaker at the 2021 Legislative Conference. You know, I really took a look at the agenda, and I've seen that you have some very interesting presentations. Two of them that just really jumped out to me are what a post-pandemic world would look like. And then secondly, come together, work together, and succeed together. A presentation that I feel really fits in to what I'm going to be discussing today. Just to give you a brief overview of the things that I'd really like to talk about today in the presentation. It's pretty simple. It's the who, what, why, and how. I'll do a brief introduction of myself, the presentation, and then I'll go into what is diversity and inclusion, why is it important, what are the benefits of diversity and inclusion, and why diversity and inclusion for economic development councils. And lastly, how Texas economic development councils can promote diversity. Now, if you have any questions or comments, just jot them down and you'll be able to ask these at the end of this presentation. To be honest with you, I'm really looking forward to the discussion period that we'll have at the end of our presentation. So let's jump right into this presentation. You know, I think it's very important when you hear a presenter to understand who that presenter is. What I'd really like to do is take a look at who is Dr. Frank Ashley. You know, I think if you truly understand who I am, then you'll have a better understanding of my perspective on diversity. Now, most people know this handsome man right here. It's Dr. Frank Ashley. I've been here in the Texas A&M system somewhere around 35 years. I've had various positions. I have made presentations pretty much all over the place. I've really been fortunate, really been blessed. I've presented on 7 different continents. And as I said, I've had 10 positions here at the A&M system, all the way up to Vice Chancellor. So when you look at Dr. Frank Ashley, you go, boy, that guy has really done pretty well. And you may ask, what does this guy know about diversity? Maybe he's done research on diversity. But a lot of people don't really know Frank Ashley. Okay, I know a lot of you smiling out there. I wish I was there to see you face to face. But this is my first grade pitcher, Frank Ashley. As you can tell, I had a stain on my shirt then. I'm still pretty messy right now. But Frank Ashley grew up in a small town in Louisiana, a low-income family, a single-parent family. Little Frank turned out to be a first-generation college graduate. And he grew up in the 50s and 60s, really in the segregated South. I mean, I remember growing up in the days where we had separate water fountains. We had a colored water fountain. We had a colored entrance to most of the restaurants. I remember as a kid having to give up my seat on the bus. I remember we couldn't go out of the front door of the bus. And I remember going to a movie theater, and me and my friends always had to sit in the balcony. We couldn't sit down with other people. That's really Frank Ashley, the person that's really given this presentation right here. You know, I grew up Louisiana, and this is the home, believe it or not, that I grew up in. It's amazing that it's still there 60 years later. Some of you may have heard the term. It's a shotgun house, 3 rooms. We had a living room, we had a kitchen, and we had a bedroom. Later, we moved from this house when I was 7 years old to a larger house out in the country, which was great for our family. The only thing about it, we had outdoor plumbing then. I mean, we had the kitchen, but if we wanted to use the restroom, some of you are probably old enough to remember that outhouse. We had an outhouse. You know, and in looking back to Frank Ashley growing up, we were really, really poor. But, you know, in talking to my older brother, we really didn't know it though. I remember my mother was a maid, and she made $35 a week being a maid. She'd leave early in the morning, get us dressed, leave early in the morning, would go to school. When we come back, she'd get home about 6 o'clock after fixing dinner for the people that she worked for. You know, we always had food on our table. We always had clean clothes. Now, they may have had patches on it. For me, I always got my brother's hand-me-downs, which were clean and everything. However, I'm 5'7" and my brother's 6'4". So I had the clothes with my sleeves rolled up and the pants legs rolled up. But you know, once again, even though we were so poor, we really didn't know it. Like a lot of families back then, we spent a lot of time with my grandmother and grandfather. They pretty much raised us. I think it's important for you to understand this because my background, my upbringing, and my life experience have really framed and shaped my view on diversity. And to be honest with you, I don't just teach diversity, I live diversity. That's the Ashley family from a few Christmases ago. We even have diversity in education. You know, I'm a proud graduate of the University of Alabama. My wife is an Aggie. My daughter played softball at the University of Louisiana Lafayette, so she's a raging Cajun. And my son decided to go to Texas A&M Kingsville. So once again, I don't just study diversity. When I talk about diversity and inclusion, I'm talking about it from a perspective of lived experiences. Okay, so you know who I am. The next thing I had to do was really learn who you guys were. A couple of things that I learned, I had to do my research. The first tenet of public speaking is make sure you know your audience. I looked at the website of the Texas Economic Development Council. You guys who are listening to this presentation right here, I learned that you are a nonprofit membership organization for economic development professionals. And I really like the point that you serve as this one-stop shop for ideas, information, and influence. And I'm sure that's why you guys are attending this conference right now, because you're looking for ideas. You're looking for information. I mean, especially since we're really in the grips of this pandemic right now. It's the largest state association of economic development professionals, volunteers, and elected officials. And I really like the common goal. Your common goal is to bring new investment and jobs to Texas. So now that you know who I am and I know who you are, let's go ahead and continue. Once again, I think it's just so important to understand everyone's perspective on things. So let's jump into this topic of diversity. Now, unfortunately, when people hear the term diversity, the thing that pops into their mind is race, ethnicity, and gender. But however, as this slide states, diversity is really the whole mix of people. When we look at our communities are composed of a mix of people. Yeah, there may be people with different races, different ethnicities, different gender, but then we have people of different ages, different national origins, different experiences, different family status, different sexual orientation, socioeconomic backgrounds, education, native languages, religions. All of these make up our community. They make up our community. And that's what we're talking about when we're referring to diversity. Once again, it's easy to see generally easy to see someone's race, ethnicity, or gender, but there are a lot of things that we can't see. We don't know. I mean, it's very hard to tell a person's religion, their national origin, their sexual orientation, their education, where they're from, geography, their culture. So it's all these things put together that I'll be referring to when I talk about diversity, this mix of people. Now I'd like to jump into, just to make sure we're all on the same page, what is diversity and inclusion and what isn't diversity and inclusion? First of all, diversity and inclusion, I like to say, it's really a mindset. It's really a mindset. So the first thing when I talk about diversity and inclusion isn't affirmative action, equal employment opportunity. When we talk about affirmative action and equal opportunity, we're talking about legislation that prevents discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Diversity and inclusion mindset goes beyond that. We want to emphasize the positive benefits for the organization as a whole, for the community as a whole that comes out of diversity and inclusion. So it's not affirmative action, equal opportunity, equal employment opportunity, but it's a desire and a commitment to diversity to benefit the whole organization or community. Secondly, diversity and inclusion mindset isn't talking about quota systems. We're not talking about setting up quotas. What we're talking about is actively and intentionally casting a wide applicant net. You know, if we're looking at businesses that we'd like to bring in, you know, are we casting a wide net to bring in all different types of businesses into our community. A diversity and inclusion mindset, it doesn't mean lowering standards. What we're talking about, we need to examine what we mean when we use the notion of fit. I don't know if this person will fit here. I don't know if this organization is a fit for our community. Often when we use the term fit, we define what fit is. And a lot of time, fit means someone who's like me, who sort of agrees with everything that I agree with. We can't have diversity if we don't expand our notion of what diversity and inclusion is. The last thing, hiring, admitting, promoting less qualified people, that is not what we're talking about when we're talking about having this diversity and inclusion mindset. It's about hiring well-qualified people who represent a variety of life experiences, a variety of cultures, a variety of perspectives. Okay, so hopefully we're on the same page when we talk about this idea of diversity and inclusion. We have a good understanding of what it means versus what it doesn't mean. So let's jump to the question. Okay, Frank, we have an understanding of what diversity is. Why do we need to manage diversity? Doesn't it just happen out there? Well, not really. Unfortunately, we all perceive people differently based on their social groups. And when I say we, I'm including myself. We all perceive people different based on their social groups. When I teach my class here, I teach managing diversity in the workplace here at Texas A&M, and I tell my students, yes, we are all Aggies. However, they're the athletes, the non-athletes. They're the people who are in fraternities and sororities. They're people who are not in fraternities and sororities. We have members of the Corps Cadets. We have people who aren't members of the Corps Cadets. And whether we admit to them or not, they perceive each other different based on their social groups. Now, it's one thing to perceive people different, but unfortunately, we all treat people differently based on their social groups. Frank, what are you getting at right here? Yes, we do. And this is called implicit, unconscious, or unintentional bias. Guys, we all have biases. Some of them we know about, but then there are others that are hidden deep within that we just don't know about it, and we don't admit to it. And we treat people differently based upon these implicit, unconscious, unintentional biases. We learn these from our parents, families, from our friends. Who do we hang out with? We learn them at school. I mean, even in elementary school, these biases are developed. And we definitely learn them from the media, especially social media today. They can also result from direct or indirect experiences that you have. I've had, I'll never forget when I was going to college in Louisiana, there was a guy from Eudora, Arkansas. And Ray was probably one of the racist people I'd ever met in my whole life. And one day we had sort of gotten together and just decided to have a come to Jesus meeting and talk to each other. And Ray said, Frank, what you have to understand is growing up in my hometown, all the black people there, now this was in the early 70s, all the black people that I knew there were either on welfare or they were going to jail. So when I saw you, that's the first thing I thought. You were just like one of them. And I said, well, Ray, you know, the thing about it, you are adult now. And don't say, well, Frank, you're different. No, it's not true. You have to look back at those experiences you had and develop new experiences. But once again, we develop these biases because of things like this. And these experiences can have positive or negative associations. You know, I remember telling Ray, you know, when I grew up as a kid, if I walked through a white neighborhood, they threw things at me. They would send their dog at me and things like that. I said, that's what I grew up with. I remember going to the first year of integrated high school. I had people spit on me. I had people call me bad names. I said, Ray, if anyone ought to hate white people, I ought to. But we have all these experiences that come up in our lives. And somehow or another, we develop these little biases. So why aren't you aware of these biases? First of all, because we view ourselves as fair and impartial. I'm a good, God-fearing person. I'm fair. I'm impartial. We believe that advancement is merit. Well, if you want to advance, you really have to earn it. That's how you move up in the world. And we admire the competence of some, which seem to show that we're free of bias. Well, I really like Mary over here, so, you know, look how competent she is and what she does over here. So I can't be biased against women. No. And some, through the exception, make it to the top and demonstrate that evaluations are basically fair and they're truly capable succeed. You know, I've had people tell me on numerous occasions, well, Frank, look what you have accomplished. Wow, you can't say that there's any biases out there. There's no way. But we have to remember that the exception is just that. Looking back at my background, looking how I grew up, I should not have succeeded. There's no doubt. I you know, first generation, you know, neither parent graduated from high school. We didn't have any money for me to go to college. I should not have been successful. But I am an exception. You can't say, well, Frank can do it. Anyone can do it. It's an atypical event. Therefore, evidence is not, it's not the norm. I mean, that's why I go around pretty much making talks all the time. I especially like to go into elementary schools to be that example for a lot of kids that sort of grew up like I did. Because I don't want them to slip through the cracks. Okay, so let's look at what can you do? What can you do? First of all, pay attention to the messages that you take in. And as I said, we get messages from all over the place today. We get messages from friends, from family. We get messages from colleagues. We get tons of messages from the media. But pay attention to the messages you take in. Secondly, slow down. Try not to make quick or stress decisions. Work to widen your network group. You know, that's really hard for a lot of people because some people go, well, you know, I really don't feel comfortable. Well, sometimes we have to feel uncomfortable to grow. Someone did a presentation once and they said, the more uncomfortable you are, the more that you grow. So widen your network. Probably one of the toughest things to do is consider opposite opinions. You know, we all want people to sort of think like we do, to sort of agree with us. But sometimes you need to consider opposite opinions. You know, and just listening to an opposite opinion doesn't mean that you have to agree with it, but at least listen to it. A hard thing to do is judging potential and performance equally. Judge potential and performance equally. If you look at the research, they'll show that when you look at people of color and women, when job decisions are being made or hires are being made, more weight is put on performance than potential. Even though a person might have tons of potential, it's not judged as high. So you need to equally judge potential and performance. And then the last thing is be humble. Be self-aware. The whole thing about know thyself. Know yourself. But once again, why manage diversity? I think we all see this. Population's changing. American society has always been diverse, but we're becoming more and more diverse. There's a decreasing number of whites and males, increasing minority and women. Population is getting older. So there are major population shifts. I have a slide a little bit later just to show what it's like here in Texas. Second of all, the laws. There are statutes and executive orders that relate strictly to diversity. I'm not going to read all these, but everyone knows Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, Americans with Disabilities, FMLA, but it's equal protection under the law. And just some common sense things as far as why manage diversity. First of all, diversity adds legitimacy to the organization. And it adds legitimacy because it's representative of the population. It's representative of the population. Research shows that managing diversity increases productivity. If people are happier, they're going to be more productive. If they feel like they're truly contributing something to their organization, they're going to be more productive. It also makes sense with CENTS. If people feel like they belong to an organization, more than likely they're going to stay at the organization. But if you ask anyone that's taken my class in the last 5 years, why manage diversity? They're going to say it's the right thing to do. It is truly the right thing to do. Once again, looking at the research, here's some benefits of diversity. Once again, groups with greater diversity have greater innovation and creativity, greater range of perspectives, generate more high quality solutions, increases constructive group processes, associated with increased sales revenue. You know, just to give you a little example of a benefit of diversity, as I said, I teach a class, Managing Diversity in the Workplace, and we talk about all areas of diversity, age, sex, sexual orientation, religion, ability differences and everything. And I like to try to think that I'm an expert on diversity. I do these presentations all over the place. However, 2 years ago, I had a situation where I had a student who was in a wheelchair in my class. And at the end of class, it was an evening class. So at the end of class, I came up to my office, got all my materials. I was walking out to the parking lot, and I see the student there in the wheelchair at the door. And I asked him, I said, hey, what are you still doing here? And he said, Dr. Ashley, I can't get out of the door. The automatic door that we had was locked. And he was just sitting there. I really felt like an idiot. I'd been in this building for 5 years, and I never thought about what does a wheelchair-bound student do if all of our doors aren't automatic. It took that student being in my class for me to realize something like that. Once again, that's a benefit of having a diverse group in your organization. Once again, this greater range of perspectives and your ability to generate the high quality solutions. Okay, let's talk about real quickly about this idea of diversity and inclusion. Because a lot of people go, okay, Doc, I understand diversity, but what's all this inclusion stuff? Here's a simple way to explain it. Diversity is being invited to the dance, and inclusion is being asked to dance. That's a big difference right there. Being invited to the dance and being asked to dance. It's one thing to invite people to participate, but if you don't allow them to participate, you're not going to be successful. The bottom line is everyone wants to fit in. Everyone feels like they belong. Everyone wants to feel like this is their town and they're an active part of their town. So let's jump to why is this important for this group right here. In 2018, U.S. News and World Report said that 50 years after the Fair Housing Act was signed, America is nearly as segregated as when President Lyndon Johnson signed the law. And then again in May 2018, the Washington Post, America is more diverse than ever, but still segregated. We got a lot of work to do. In 2018, they said the U.S. is on track to be a majority and minority nation by 2044. You know, let's as we look at our state right here, and this is I got to tell you that some of these slides came from the Office of the Texas Demographer. You know, as Texas grows, it ages and it continues to diversify. You know, back in 1996, when I was in the College of Education, the state demographer back then was a guy named Dr. Steve Murdoch. And I'll never forget, Murdoch used to do these presentations. If you've been around here as long as I have, you may have remembered some of his presentations. But Steve Murdoch used to say how the population of Texas was changing. And he made the statement that in 2015, which was 19 years from when he made the statement, Texas would be a majority minority state. Guys, we're here. We are here. Texas is a majority minority state. Looking at population change by race, 87% of the growth has been from non-white population groups. And if we look at what it's going to be in the next 40 years, it's going even higher. With all that going on, we have the economic impact of COVID-19. That's why I'm really interested to really look at that one presentation. Looking at the nominal GDP decline, negative 7.3% for the US and negative 9.8% for us here in Texas. When we look at small businesses, January 20 through November 2020, minus 32.6% change in open small business in Texas. Negative 13.1% change in consumer spending in Texas. This is from Dr. Chris Thornburg, who's with the UC Riverside Center of Economic Forecasting. And it's the question, how long to get back to normal? So with the COVID affecting our communities, with our idea diversity, what does it mean to you guys who are watching this presentation? I think we all know the saying, the rising tide lifts all the boats, which means an improved economy will benefit all participants. Everyone in the whole community benefits if the economy improves. But the question comes up, a rising tide doesn't raise people who don't have a boat. How do we build a boat for them? We have to give them the basic infrastructure to rise with the tide. The bottom line, everyone, is everyone does better when no one is left behind. And you really don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, that's one thing I love about living in Texas. Texans work together to improve Texas. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Everyone loves to share their ideas. So where do you start? The first question is, does your council have a diversity statement? If it does it concentrate on outcomes and not reasons? This is what we would like to accomplish, and this is not why. Focus on the how and the why. Secondly, when you look at economic development, are you looking at it from the lens of community development? Because community development is economic development. You got to have a true understanding of the profile of your community. Investing in the development of the community in schools and local businesses. You know, I'll never forget, I was offered a job at another small town, and as a dean of the College of Education. And the first thing I did when I was offered the job is I went on the TEA website to check the schools out. And I told the president of the university that. And he goes, "Why did you do that, Frank?" And I said, "Well, to be honest with you, I never would accept the jobs if the schools were low performing. I've got 2 young kids, and that's more important to me than the job." So you have to invest in developing the community. And when I say schools, all schools. And we need to ask ourselves, how do we inspire members of the community? What is your council doing to inspire small businesses, minority women-owned businesses? You know, I took a look at the U.S. Department of Transportation Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, and there's a link right there that I'm not going to click on. But if you have the presentation, or if you can write that down, hopefully all of you are very aware about this. But they talk about all the opportunities for disadvantaged businesses. I visited with a friend of mine here in College Station, Jose Quintana. He's the president of AGX, and he is big into economic development here in our area. And I like this quote that he gave me: the economic vibrancy of our minority population is the last frontier. The economic vibrance of our minority population is the last frontier. And Jose was telling me that we really don't do a great job in inspiring all members of the community to do that. So that's one thing that council should really take a look at. How to inspire minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned businesses in our community. So what's in it for me? This is a slide that I brought from my other presentation that I did for downtowns. And I think it applies to communities. Downtowns have their own special culture, rooted first and foremost in altitudes. Cultures help shape, and I liked it in red, affirming the belief that diversity is a strength and all are welcome regardless of race, age, ethnicity, gender, identity, or income. That's it, guys. That's what we're talking about right there. If we're looking at economic development, diversity is a strength, and everyone is welcome. That's how we build the economies of our towns. You know, the future's bright. The future's really bright in spite of the current pandemic. I have this slide here because to remind me of my grandmother, Miss Winchester. My grandmother used to have this bag of rags, and matter of fact, she lived to be 105 years old. She would get these bag of rags out and sit in a rocking chair, and she'd take a rag, old t-shirt or whatever, and she'd sew it together and sew it together, and she'd do that for months at a time. To her, every little piece of cloth was sacred to her. But after she did it for so long, she wound up making this beautiful quilt. And guys, that's what we are in Texas. Each one of us is just a little rag like this. Each little business is this little rag. But it takes that little rag to make this beautiful quilt that we have before us right here. And I think back to her because that's what we are in Texas, guys. That's what we are. What we have to do is we have to believe that in our communities, in our cities, in our towns, all are welcome. Because by all of us working together, we'll be successful. Thank you so much for allowing me to visit with you for a little bit. As I said, I'm really looking forward to getting together to have some discussions. So thank you, and I hope you have a great conference.
And now your Q&A portion.